They say the morgue is the last stop for the living, a place of silence, steel drawers, and cold air heavy with the smell of disinfectant and decay. But for a small and horrifying number of people, the morgue wasn't the end of their story. It was where they woke up. Tonight, we'll explore 10 chilling cases of people who were declared dead and then opened their eyes inside the morgue. In a small hospital in Poland, an elderly woman was declared dead after her heart appeared to stop. Doctors signed her death certificate, and her body was taken to the morgue, placed inside a refrigerated drawer. 11 hours later, a morgue worker heard something strange, a thumping sound echoing through the cold room. At first, he thought it was a machine rattling. Then came the sound of a muffled scream. When he opened one of the drawers, he found the woman alive, her body trembling from the cold. She gasped for air and whispered that she'd been awake the whole time, trapped in darkness, unable to move or call for help until her body finally thawed enough to let her scream. She survived, but she could never sleep in silence again. In Caracas, Venezuela, a man named Carlos Camejo was pronounced dead after a car accident. His body was sent to the morgue for an autopsy. When the coroner began cutting into his face to examine the wound, blood began to flow, something that shouldn't happen to a corpse. Then Carlos groaned. The staff froze as the man's eyes snapped open, wide with panic. He had felt everything, the scalpel, the pressure, the first cut, but had been too weak to move or speak. He later said it was like being trapped in a nightmare, aware of everything but powerless to stop it. In Russia, a young bride collapsed during her wedding reception. Doctors couldn't find a pulse and declared her dead. Her devastated family arranged for a quick burial the next day. At the morgue, her body was prepared and placed in a coffin overnight. But in the middle of the night, a security guard patrolling the building heard a noise, soft tapping, then pounding, coming from the viewing room. When he opened the door, he found the coffin lid trembling. Inside was the bride, alive, eyes open wide, gasping for breath. She died of heart failure a few hours later, but not before telling doctors she remembered everything, including being zipped into the body bag. In 2010, a morgue attendant in South Africa fainted after discovering a dead man moving inside one of the refrigerated units. The man had been declared dead from an asthma attack. When he woke up inside the icy drawer, he began screaming and pounding, convinced he was in hell. The attendant opened the door to see the man sitting up, covered in frost, eyes glazed over but very much alive. By the time emergency services arrived, the man's temperature had dropped dangerously low. He survived, but the morgue staff quit the next day, saying they could still hear knocking from the empty drawers. In 2018, a woman in China was sent to the morgue after hospital staff failed to detect her heartbeat. Hours later, a worker noticed movement in one of the body bags. When they opened it, the woman gasped for air, her body trembling violently. She had been alive for hours inside the zipped bag, suffocating slowly while her body refused to die. Security footage later showed the bag writhing faintly for almost 30 minutes before anyone noticed. In the 1970s, a hospital morgue in Mississippi had a night attendant named John. He'd worked there for years and was used to the eerie quiet of the place. One night he walked in to find one of the covered bodies sitting upright on the table. The man had been declared dead from a drug overdose several hours earlier. John thought he was seeing things until the man turned his head and whispered, "It's too cold." John quit that night, leaving the morgue doors unlocked behind him. The patient lived another 2 days before dying for real, but no one ever explained how he sat up. A 62-year-old woman in Detroit was declared dead after being found unresponsive at her home. Paramedics followed protocol, checked her vitals multiple times, and sent her body to the morgue. Hours later, as workers were preparing to embalm her, she suddenly took a deep, rattling breath. The mortician screamed and dropped his tools as she opened her eyes. When she finally recovered, she said she remembered hearing voices around her, feeling hands move her body, and the suffocating cold. But the worst part, she said, was realizing she couldn't scream, no matter how hard she tried. In 2014, a woman in Brazil was declared dead after suffering complications during childbirth. Her family was devastated. The hospital sent her to the morgue, where she was to be kept overnight before burial. But when her husband came to identify the body, he noticed something strange: condensation on the inside of the morgue bag. Panicked, he called for help. The morgue worker opened the bag and found her breathing shallowly, her eyes flickering. She survived, but she remembered being trapped in total darkness, hearing voices around her and thinking she was in her own grave. In the 1980s, a man in India was pronounced dead after a heart attack and placed in the morgue's cold storage. The next morning, the staff discovered the freezer door open and the man lying on the floor. At first, they thought it was a break-in until they checked the security footage. The man had opened the drawer himself. He had clawed his way out during the night, collapsing a few feet away from safety. The hospital quietly removed the footage, and his family was simply told that he died peacefully. In Ecuador, mourners gathered for the funeral of a 76-year-old woman who had been declared dead after suffering a cardiac arrest. As the family prayed, a faint knocking echoed from inside the coffin. At first, no one wanted to believe it, but when the lid began to rattle, panic erupted. They opened it to find the woman alive, her face pale, her breathing shallow, her eyes darting around in terror. She had been conscious inside the morgue for hours, aware of everything. Her last words before she died again were a whisper, "I told you I wasn't ready." The morgue is supposed to be where life ends, a place of silence, stillness, and finality. But these stories remind us that sometimes death makes mistakes. To wake up surrounded by the dead, trapped in the cold, unable to scream, it's a fate worse than death itself. Which of these stories chilled you the most? Let me know in the comments, and remember, not everyone who's pronounced dead stays that way, and not all of you are subscribed to Tales from the Fiend.